back to Paris and left his whole army to collapse there and become British prisoners. So the British helped set up an independent Egypt back in the Napoleonic period, and it was run by local, but the Mamluks in Egypt had been somewhat independent since the 1200s when they stopped the Mongols. We had a Mamluk dynasty in Egypt going all the way back to, so that was the upper class. Mamluks, you might be interested to know, the reason we call them Mamluks, mulk in Arabic is property, and Arabic is three-letter roots built up like Hebrew on the base of three-letter roots. So Mamluk means someone who is owned. In this case, owned by the state. The Mamluks were slaves who were levied in places like the Caucasus and in the Balkans, sold into slavery for Christian children mostly in Egypt, and brought up as an independent janissary corps of political military rulers whose only allegiance was to the state. A crazy thing, somewhat based on Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic had been translated in these parts of the world. So you know, history is a great thing. We don't give enough history courses in this university. And I don't even think we have the personnel to teach the history courses that we need to give, but I won't get into that. I haven't kept abreast of it. But I know that Middle Eastern history has been sadly lacking, and I would love to teach a lot of this stuff, but I can't teach everything. So I have to restrict myself to what I did teach. I did teach Islamic religion and culture and civilization. Started that course I taught it for 25 years here. Never had any trouble with any Muslims or Arabs in that course. In any event, the Mamluks were semi-independent under the Ottoman Empire from the 1200s. The Ottomans hadn't even come yet, but they made a deal with the Ottomans, came under them, but they weren't totally under them. So Egypt was semi-independent for a long time, and then with the Napoleon period, it even got more so. And then you had these local Egyptian kings, King Farouk and people like that, who were the product of the British situation with Napoleon, which is a pretty weird thing to develop there. So Egypt wasn't an Ottoman successor state. So when did the British take a hold of Egypt? Well, they bought the Suez Canal, and then they wanted to protect it. So around the 1880s, they just took it over and put their governor in there, and that's it. Made it a British colony. They just moved in. I don't know what date within the 1880s, but somewhere. And then they had a sort of a local person as a puppet king that the British governor controlled. But the British were in Cairo from the 1880s onwards, and basically around the country. So that really wasn't, they did that to protect the Suez Canal that they had bought. They wanted the passage to India. To go to India, it's like going out to California from New York back in the gold rush. They had that program on television last night. You'd have to go around Cape Horn to get to California. Is that Cape Horn or is that Africa? What's the one in South America? The one down there. I mean, it was an 8-month voyage from New York to California. And terrible, terrible weather down there in the south. So they used to land the ships in Panama, and then they'd have to hike across this very jungle-infested sort of area and pick up a boat on the other side if they survived yellow fever and malaria and all that. That was the other way to get here by sea. Other than that, you had to come 2 miles a day in a covered wagon, 2 miles an hour in a covered wagon. Which itself would take about 4 or 5 months. It just depends which way you wanted to do it. It might freeze to death in the Donner Pass. In any case, they wanted this. We did the Panama Canal for the same reason. I think Teddy Roosevelt again, but the British, needed the easy way to India, and they were going to protect that with all the force at their disposal. In any event, these countries like Syria, Jordan, Palestine, they were provinces in the Ottoman Empire. And Palestine wasn't even a province. The province was Syria, and then Jerusalem was a kind of independent entity because of the holy sites and the Christian pilgrims that would come, so they made special arrangements for Palestine was not a province of the Ottoman Empire, period. The British set up Palestine because they've been reading Roman Greek history, and they like, you know, the Roman name, and they were all classicists in the civil service, so they called it Palestina, you know, Palestine. But the Ottomans never called this Palestine. There wasn't even a Palestinian identity before 1918. You know, and a lot of people just don't know anything about the history. And the British and the League of Nations, Mr. Wilson's gift to us, set up these mandates. America never joined, so then the British and the French had total sway in these things. And they carved up the Middle East between them, and they had French got a mandate for Lebanon and Syria, and the British got mandates for Palestine and for Iraq. However, and they got Kenya and a few other places. You can look at the mandate scheme if you want from the Versailles Treaty, and the Palestine Order in Council was 1922. I have a book on this subject. It's called Islamic Law and Mandate Palestine and Modern Israel, shortened Islamic Law and Israel, in Palestine and Israel, which I wrote for my PhD dissertation. And that's out from Brill, and I think it's probably in the library here. But I discussed the whole mandate setup in that book. I have to learn it all myself. Palestine Order in Council was 1922 when the British actually set up the government in Palestine as a result of getting the mandate from the League of Nations, which they engineered for themselves. They made a deal with the French to divide these areas up that they'd taken from the Ottomans. So the Ottoman Empire became Turkey, and then they disconnected all these provinces. So how did Jordan get there? The British decided they didn't like the situation in Palestine, which was in both, the Palestine Mandate was on both sides of the river, and included Jordan. One of the points that people don't realize, because of the propaganda and all the, you know, it's just all the wash of complete absurd opinions that you hear of really uninformed people. They don't realize that there was no Jordan back then. The British set up Jordan themselves, and they carved 2/3 of the Palestine Mandate out of the Palestine Mandate and gave it to the royal family of Jordan, because the royal family of Jordan were the people who had cooperated with T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. And they weren't from Jordan, they were from Mecca, and they'd been kicked out of Mecca by the Saudis. So the British felt an obligation. So they took the family from Mecca that had helped them in the First World War to some extent, that Lawrence had cultivated and promoted, and they gave them Jordan and Iraq.